Are ghosts real? Several recent encounters suggest there might be more things in heaven and earth than we can dream of.
So are werewolves just a Hollywood creation, or do half-man, half-wolf creatures really exist? Now, tonight, we kick off our Conspiracy Theory Month series, which was a...
The legend of the vampire actually goes back for centuries, and it exists in some form or another in almost every culture. In fact, some people believe the first vampire story was in the Bible.
Well, for decades, only crackpots and crazy people believed in UFOs. That's what I thought anyway. And then in recent years, it turns out that governments have been taking them seriously all along.
Try and clear up an ancient mystery with the help of a prominent veterinarian who says she can prove that Bigfoot exists and that he's related to all of us.
New reports, 5 pilots coming forward over the weekend saying they've had multiple mid-air encounters with high-flying, fast-moving objects.
And good evening, folks. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Celestial Oddities PairOfNormal Guys podcast show. I'm your host, Garrett Jagaman.
And I'm your co-host, Daniel James.
We have a great fun-filled evening for you tonight. We're going to talk about some in-depth conversations. Why don't you give them a little peek of what we're going to be digging into tonight, Daniel?
Well, friends, tonight we're going to talk about the topics of sleep paralysis and night terrors.
And I think it's going to be a fun show. You know, if you listened recently to our Oddworld Listeners Encounters episode 1, the very first story that we brought on was actually about sleep paralysis and night terrors both. So it's kind of ironic that the following show would be about that subject, but just fun coincidence there. And if you are listening to us out there, we do ask that you hit the share button, the follow button, and the like button. Whatever button they give you, go ahead and click that. And we are on all major online platforms, so you can listen to us on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Amazon, Spreaker, you name it. If it's out there, we're on it. And if you want to instant message us live during the shows, you can do so at Spreaker.com. That's Spreaker.com, or on the Spreaker app. Just search up Brutal Business Entertainment or Celestial Oddities, and you can message us during the show to ask questions to us and pick our brains. We would love you to do so. And then, like I said, hit the share button, because the more you do that, the more we move up the ranks and the bigger and better things we can do with the show. And we do appreciate your love and support, so help get us out there. And without further ado, I'm going to let Daniel jump in and tell us a little bit about these subjects and kind of dive into it.
Cool, guys. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and to everybody who's going to be jumping on here, listening as we go. I'm really excited and passionate about the topics of night terrors and sleep paralysis. And how I'm going to kick this off is we're going to take it back to my childhood. Now, I can remember experiencing these concepts of sleep paralysis all the way back to the age of 10 years old. Okay, so I'm going to assume here that it's pretty common knowledge of what we're talking about, but to go into a little brief description, many people describe the phenomenon or the experience of after they go to sleep and they fall asleep at night, they wake up as what can be described as like a lucid state, sort of like an out-of-body sort of astral projection sort of state where you seem to become aware of the fact that your body is asleep and it's physically paralyzed and you can't control it, but you are conscious, you're cognitive of the room that you're in, and you have an awareness of the fact that you are awake, although you don't seem to have any control over your body. Now, while you're in this state of being, not only do you not have control over your physical vessel, but it's in this state of being, in this vibrational frequency, where we tend to experience a lot of paranormal things. And this common occurrence tends to generate certain sounds, certain noises. Many people describe hearing electrical buzzes, humming sounds, those types of electrical frequencies. Sometimes they'll even see static around themselves. And as they look down at their paralyzed body in the room that they're in, whether you're in your own bed at home or whether you're at a friend's house, wherever you are, one of the common descriptions is you can see your environment. You just can't move or interact within it. And then what happens is certain beings that are most commonly depicted as being malevolent, frightening, scary, fear-based sort of creatures will manifest, okay? And there's a lot of speculation and theory about who these beings are, what their intentions are. Why can't we move? What is this phenomenon that we're experiencing, and what can we do about it? So as I mentioned before, I've been experiencing sleep paralysis and night terrors since I was 10. And I am now in my early 30s, and this has been an occurrence that has perpetuated throughout that entire duration. Now, one thing that I can say about the phenomenon of sleep paralysis is it tends to be triggered during certain times in my life or certain things that I'm going through. If my body is in good health and my relationships are positive and, I'm doing well, in my hobbies and my passions, I actually don't tend to experience this phenomenon very often. But when I'm maybe struggling financially, or my health isn't as good, or I'm struggling in my relationships, things like that, work-related dramas, whatever it might be, when I'm in more of like a dense negative frequency throughout my day-to-day life, sleep paralysis tends to trigger more often. Now, what I don't want to do is put a negative spin on this phenomenon. However, let's start talking a little bit about the beings that people have reported seeing. Now, that's one of the more fascinating things about sleep paralysis, is that there is a congruent list of creatures or beings or entities, if you will, that people all over the world report seeing, and they all describe them as having the same attributes, having the same physical appearance, or sometimes performing the same acts. Okay? So some of the more common ones that people have described is the Hat Man. Now, I personally have seen this Hat Man being 10, 15, 20 times throughout my life. Now, this guy is very, very tall. He always seems to stand the height of the door frame for whatever reason. He's always standing in like the mouth of a hallway or a door, and you can see that he's so physically tall that it's almost like as if he has to bend down or kneel down or hunch a little bit, because his head goes all the way up to the ceiling. And to me, it looks like he's wearing like a big trench coat, and he's got maybe like a fedora hat on. And this is a being that many people have reported seeing. Another one that I see quite often is the hooded or the robed figure, who will commonly be standing alongside my bed. Sometimes there may be more than one of them, and I never usually see any facial features or any eyes. Another strange feature or characteristic about these hooded beings is I don't ever see them with hands. For whatever reason, I see the wrist of the robes, but I don't ever see hands coming down. Some other creatures are people will describe or depict like a small little gremlin or a little demonic creature that almost looks like a cat being perched up on their chest, sometimes walking along the bed that they're sleeping in. Another creature people describe also is actually like a spider or a crab-like creature. It's more crab-like than spider, and these beings are often depicted walking on the ceilings above the bed. They've also been said to be projecting certain sound waves from them, and these crab-like creatures do have large glowing eyes. Another creature that I've seen multiple times, and if I'm honest, this is probably my least favorite that I've ever seen in sleep paralysis, is more like a giant, very cliche movie-esque werewolf, like a giant wolf man who's usually running down a hallway or coming up a staircase if you're having sleep paralysis. I've seen this being, and then I actually see him more when I'm having night terrors. So one thing I am going to do is I'm going to have Garrett talk a little bit about his perspective of night terrors, because I also do believe that night terrors are slightly different than actual sleep paralysis. I think they're different phenomenon, but I think that the entities and the beings that it sort of come into our awareness, into our space, are fundamentally the same. So we'll talk a little bit more about that tonight as well. So getting back into, sleep paralysis. Like
Absolutely.
I mentioned before, I do experience more sleep paralysis when I'm in more of a negative state of being in my day-to-day life. Usually, it's associated to medical issues or issues within the family that cause stress and emotional distress, things like that. That usually it promotes a breeding ground for sleep paralysis to manifest, sometimes once or twice a night. Getting back into a little bit more of my personal experiences, some other things that I've experienced is I have heard men, human male voices, talking about me in the room that I'm in while my body is paralyzed. In the current bedroom that I live in now, I do have a wooden staircase that goes up to my bedroom, and I've heard people going up and down the stairs at night, knocking on the walls. I hear a lot of static for some reason. Static is always a common sound that I hear. I mean, my whole body feels like it's buzzing, and I hear this electricity sound. So those are some of the more recent experiences that I've had. At least last winter, I haven't had sleep paralysis in a couple months, fortunately, because it's not usually the most pleasant experience. But over the winter, when I was having a lot of medical challenges, it was happening quite often. And I was hearing these men's voices, okay? So when I talk about the men's voices and I talk about this electromagnetic frequency sound, that's going to get me into another topic, getting in deeper into the concept of sleep paralysis and what is it and why does it happen. Well, there's a lot of theories as to why does this phenomenon occur. Well, if these malevolent entities are manifesting in our rooms and our space, and they're sometimes seen as operating on us, or maybe basking us in some sort of sound frequency that might be unsettling, standing alongside of our bed or standing on our bed, performing certain acts people have described. These are all things that are generally unsettling. 9 times out of 10, people wouldn't really invite this type of circumstance into their life. They wouldn't ask for this to happen. It's not generally an empowering experience to not have control over your body. So this isn't really something that people generally enjoy. But why is it happening? Well, we could get into the topic that there are multiple layers of density and dimension that exist all around us. And we exist in the 3rd and 4th dimensional frequencies and the 3rd density, but there are also lower densities and dimensions, and there are also higher ones. And you have to understand that there are other beings, much like humans, that exist in these other realms, in these other states of awareness. And these other dimensions can be described almost like tuning a radio, like an old analog radio that has an AM and an FM, and then it's got multiple stations and channels within those certain bands, those frequencies. Well, dimensions and densities work in that same exact way. It's just that we as human beings having a human experience, we're just tuned into this one specific frequency, and the only other state of being that we usually shift to is when we go to sleep at night and we enter like the dream state, where you're having dreams and you're going into that sort of astral frequency of the dream realm, which is another topic that we should definitely have like a whole series of shows on.
We absolutely could, because it gets pretty deep on that end.
Deep, man, deep. And so I believe that these beings that I don't have exact names for, they exist in other densities and dimensions, and they can reach us. We're more accessible to them when we're in a lower vibrational state of being, which is stress, fear, anxiety, anger, all of those sort of like negative states of being that you can be in. They promote like a breeding ground. You're almost like a light tower for these negative thought forms and these negative entities that exist in these other dimensions and densities that can attach to you when you're more of like a vibrational match to the world that they live in. And the way that I understand dimensions is that when you exist in a higher dimension, you can perceive all of the beings and the entities that exist in the lower dimensions beneath your own. But for whatever reason, don't ask me why, we can't perceive the beings that exist in dimensions above us. Okay, so what that means is if you exist in the 3rd dimension, there are other beings, both positive and negative, okay, that exist in the 4th and the 5th and the 6th, and we can't perceive them up the ladder. It's just the way that the physics works of, the radio tuner that I mentioned. But if you are of, say, for example, the 4th or the 5th dimension, and that's your innate frequency that you exist in, you can perceive beings that are within lower dimensions than your own. It's just the way that tier system works. So let's say that you're having, a rough couple days. Maybe you had a family member pass, or you're having a hard time at work, boyfriend, girlfriend broke up with you, you're struggling with money, whatever it is, it's putting you in a habitual state of negativity. You're having a lot of fear-based thoughts, and you're angry all the time, you're stressed out. That's like a a very that promotes a sort of ecosystem for these beings that exist in higher dimensions that are malevolent, maybe parasitic, to sort of like spot you like a light in the dark. They can see you when you are in these states of beings, and that's when I think that they sort of gravitate towards humans and then can sort of attach onto you in your sleep states. And then these are the beings like, incubus and succubus and things like that that can attack you, parasitically through the dream state, and also sometimes manifest into our reality as well, depending on certain, vibrational factors, which we'll talk about another time. But sleep paralysis is almost like a halfway in, halfway out. It's almost where your energy, your consciousness is meeting them halfway through that lucid dream state where you're not completely rooted in your body, but because you're also asleep in the dream state, but you kind of snap out of it halfway. And it's when these beings are attached to you and doing their whatever it is their agenda is in that state, that it's almost like we wake up during the process, almost like catching them in the act is kind of a way that I've always thought about that. So that's sort of my interpretation of the phenomena of sleep paralysis, and I'm only speaking for myself in terms of when I've experienced it and what's going on in my life that tend to promote like an ecosystem for that to manifest. It's usually when I'm just struggling in my day-to-day life, and then when I'm having my life is fucking awesome and I'm in a great mood and things are going very well, I sleep well. My dreams are cleaner, and I don't experience sleep paralysis or night terrors, which I've had as well, and those are not a good time. So those are some of the beings that we have reports of people seeing all over the world. That's the circumstance that I experienced sleep paralysis myself, and like I said, I've been having it for well over 20 years, on and off intermittently. With a wide variety of experiences. And then one more thing that I want to touch on that I lost my train of thought, but back to the men's voices and the electrical frequencies that I hear sometimes when I'm in the sleep paralysis state. Another theory that I've been working on for quite a while is we also have what's called as extraterrestrial contact while we're also in the dream state, but this is not as often malevolent as I think some of the beings that we experience when we're in sleep paralysis that I mentioned before. I think that the sleep paralysis state is used for multiple reasons, under multiple agendas, in multiple circumstances, and what I don't want to do is promote the breeding ground here, cultivate the idea that it's always a negative and malevolent thing that should be feared. Another side of that coin is that through my studies and working with extraterrestrials is that another side of this is that sometimes positive extraterrestrial beings will induce a temporary paralysis of the body, and they can actually do certain types of medical interventions on the human being while they're in the rested state. And sometimes while they're doing these medical interventions, you can actually, wake up during the process. So if you're asleep and you wake up while an extraterrestrial being is maybe doing something etherically, or doing something to maybe your light body or your mental body or your spiritual body or your physical body, medically speaking, and you wake up, the sleep paralysis triggers as a default to not only protect you from hurting yourself, because if you wake up and there are aliens doing something to your body that you don't remember having consented to, you're probably going to go into a panic and you might get violent or you might hurt yourself. More importantly, you actually might hurt them when they're not actually there to hurt you. So that's another thing that I've been studying for a couple of years, is that yes, these negative malevolent beings seem to sort of gravitate towards people who are having challenging times in their lives, and they tend to become very present during the sleep paralysis state, which triggers during those times, and those can be malevolent occurrences. I also believe that there are times when you are not in danger, you're not being threatened, and there might be positive beings who also have their own agenda that could be to your benefit, but the mechanism of having your body paralyzed is the same. Okay, so that's where discerning what is an infringement on your free will and what isn't becomes a little bit of a gray area. It becomes a bit muddier and harder to interpret. So when the body feels disempowered, or you feel like, you aren't in control of what's happening, you instantly go to a fear-based reaction, and that's where that point that I wanted to make was that I think that there's a lot of reasons and a lot of circumstances in which sleep paralysis can occur to any given person at any given time, and we're all just experiencing it and trying to figure it out together. So that is my introduction to sleep paralysis, and we can also talk a little bit more about night terrors. And Garrett, I'd love to hear what your perspective is on that. But I mean, let's talk about this, man. Sleep paralysis. What do you think about it?
Sleep paralysis is very interesting to me. It's a definite subject that I wanted us to touch base on because there's a lot of stories that I come across in the paranormal realm and the supernatural whenever I'm talking to a lot of people out there in the field, and they're bringing up stories associated or directly associated with sleep paralysis and also night terrors. And to give you kind of an example, we were interviewing a gentleman by the name of Aaron, and he was on our last show, Celestial Oddities Oddworld Listeners Encounters Volume 1. He was the very first call. And he described a story of waking up at his girlfriend's house. And when he woke up, he never really spent much time in his house, but he woke up, he felt himself awake, but realized at that time he couldn't move. He lay there and he kept trying to move. He couldn't. He didn't know what was going on. He was worried he couldn't speak. Well, then she come home, and she's standing across the house, and he could see her, but he couldn't communicate with her. She left. Then he seen was one of the entities that you did not speak of, which I'm kind of glad, because it kind of segued right into this part, is a very malevolent one that's often named, which is the hag woman, the old woman. And it's sometimes said that she's seen, and there's not much more to it. A lot of times it's associated with whenever she's seen, she sits on someone's chest, and it's very hard to breathe, which is one of the things associated with sleep paralysis. So he had mentioned this, and through his talks about sleep paralysis, I had mentioned, I was like, oh, you've seen this woman. I said, if you're someone who experiences this, I said, it's surprising that you didn't see the man in the top hat or the man in the hat. Well, he instantly became shook. Because he said you could tell it blew his mind, because he's not really someone that's into this. He just called with an experience, and he said, "Oh my God, that I was going to tell you two stories. The second story was about another experience I had with a dark, shadowy man in a hat." He says, "I can't even believe you just said that to me." He says, "Wow." It was mind blown, and it's striking when you look at all of the different cases of sleep paralysis and the commonality between the things that are seen. Two of the most absolute common are the man in the hat and the old hag lady. The also one is kind of interesting, is you had made mention in the first episode with me and you together about some of the sightings that you had during sleep paralysis, because I know that this is a big subject for you, is something that you've experienced throughout your life, and you had mentioned the cat that almost looked like something out of Harry Potter. Well, a recent guest that we had on one of our episodes actually contacted me last night and said that she had heard the episode of the Listeners Encounters, but did not listen to mine and your episode yet, and she just did. Was floored to know that when she heard your experience about the cat creature, that it described exactly something she had seen but never told anyone, because she was kind of embarrassed and didn't know what to tell someone. She's seen some type of cat creature. So time and time again, my point behind this is so many people that experience this similar phenomena is experiencing very similar things, which is pretty interesting. Now, there's 3 stages said to be to sleep paralysis. There's what's called the intruder, what is called the incubus, and then the levitation stage. Dan kind of broke them down separately, and I like that, is that there's oftentimes you just see someone in the room, you see a presence of something in the room, and it might not necessarily be good or bad, it might just be something that you see in that state. You're not able to move, your mind is allowing an open gate to maybe a different dimension, a different plane than we normally see and and associate ourselves with. Well, the second is what's called the incubus stage, which often is referred to as the creature climbing on top of you while you're sleeping, and there's a great pressure on your chest and you can't breathe, or they're choking you, they're strangling you. And a lot of times the stories are very similar. And then one of the least common ones that I specifically hear about, which goes more into what Dan just spoke about, is the levitation stage. I think they are individually separate. I believe that the intruder can be both good and bad. I believe it can be both paranormal or even alienistic of sorts, because there is a lot of reports of sleep paralysis associated with visitation. And I believe that that is more associated with the levitation stage. As you said, they might be coming down for medical purposes. You do wake up during it, and at that time you cannot move, and you're more of a levitated state. You're floating. Because most people that mention the creature climbing on top of them and choking them, the demons, they don't mention levitating. When you hear the levitating, it is usually associated with the alien visitation.
Right.
So I think there are different things at play here with the sleep paralysis, as we had talked about. I think that there are just a wavelength of things going on around us that we are not aware of, different energies, different things like that. And when we are in that stage, we are more susceptible to seeing it. And it's almost like a light switch. A light switch flicks off at night when you go to sleep, and your body shuts down and your mind shuts down, but your mind also activates to a different side, to that brain, that sleeping side. Well, whenever you wake up in sleep paralysis, it's almost as though the switch for your body was still shut off, and the switch for your mind started to get flipped on, but it's stuck halfway. So now you're trapped between, I'm still asleep, but I'm still awake. You're cognitive of what's going on around you, but at the same time, you're in this other realm that you've never seen with your open eyes, because that's the dream state. So then it starts to kind of bridge that gap and allow things to come in and see you. So it's very interesting in that regard. I've heard a lot of stories of both. There was a lady who recently reached out to me by email and said she did not want to be on the show. She just chose that it's not something she wants to discuss, but she experienced the alien visitation. And she had told me a story of waking up in the middle of the night, not able to move, and at the bottom of her bed stood some type of alien being who just stared at her and stood at her. But she felt calm. She did not feel threatened. She felt very at peace, and he was pretty much just telling her, I wanted you to know that I'm here and I'm watching you. And he just kind of just walked out and left. So very interesting. Like I said, I agree with Dan on the fact that I think that night terrors and sleep paralysis are different. They're very similar, but they are also very different. Unfortunately, some people are plagued with very demonic sides of it for one reason or another. Some are not. And usually, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the time for people who do have them, it seems to last throughout that person's life. Sometimes it can be a one-off, but very rarely is that the case. It seems like most people who experience it do experience it throughout their life. And as you mentioned earlier, a lot of times it is associated with something stressful going on in their life. Some type of stressor is being pressed, and whether it be a hardship, whether it be depression. I listened to a story of a girl who was drinking heavily at this time and partying a lot, and she just was kind of in that stage where she didn't care about anything, and that's when the night terror started and the sleep paralysis started. So I do believe that there are triggers that are triggering that. Now, I know a lot of scientists try to say there's explanations behind this. It's all explainable, and it might be, but
well, look at it like this, Garrett. When you are in a very stressed out time in your life, emotionally, mentally, physically, financially, whatever it may be, you feel disempowered. That's one of the main attributes of those states of being is disempowerment. What happens when you're under sleep paralysis? You literally feel disempowered. You feel out of control of your body, out of control of what's happening in the circumstances before you. It's almost like as if it's a way of reflecting back to you, the state of your life, that disempowering sort of out of control, very, fear-based way of being.
Very true. I mean, it does make sense that it's a trigger that you because oftentimes if you think about something enough in your mind, whether regularly in your conscious or your subconscious, if you reflect constantly about something, you usually have it in your dreams. You're constantly beyond your mind. So when you're constantly in a state of sadness, everything's going wrong, you're not happy financially, romantically, whatever it might be, you're reflecting on that, then your brain is more susceptible that when you are sleeping, it's half in and half out. It can trigger those emotions, which can alter. And I mean, it could be as simple as an explanation of it changing chemicals around. They did try to say in studies that I listened to that it was neuroinhibitors not firing and transmitting correctly between the two of them. And they also tried to say that could explain the visuals and hallucinations. That could explain that if your body is in a paralyzed state at that time, that your lungs are having a harder time breathing, so therefore it would feel restricted. It would feel like someone's squeezing you. So then your mind starts to fill in the gaps. I can't move. I'm half in, I'm half out of it. It starts to trigger your fears. What's going on here? When the fear kicks in, then it starts filling in the gaps. Okay, there's something in the room with me. Okay, there's something on my chest squeezing me. So there's a lot of people that try to explain that in a scientific sense, saying that it's all just your brain chemicals working in ways that we haven't exactly figured out, but that's what it is. But with that being said, they can't explain why numerous accounts across the world have been other parts of your body. People saying that they felt that their legs were being pushed on so hard that their legs would snap, and things like that. They can explain the lungs. They can't explain anything else, or also why there has been people who have experienced multiple scenarios of night terrors or sleep paralysis at the same time or same areas. And I recently watched a documentary about a village, and I believe it was in the Middle East somewhere, that the entire village over several months' time were being plagued with sleep paralysis. Very interesting things, that multiple people experiencing the same visuals, the same things, all not being able to move in the middle of the night, all similar stories of what they experienced, and scientists can't begin to, really account on that or why something like that would be. So it gives a very interesting take. Is it something that's natural in your own mind, or is it something supernatural?
Well, I'm apt and prone to believe that it is induced. Especially speaking in terms of that whole village who experienced it and had similar circumstances and experiences during the process. That to me seems like some sort of an experiment. And getting back to when I told you about, I hear the buzzing sound and the men's voices. I don't know why every time I try to say this in this episode, it's almost like I'm being blocked from finishing the stream of thought. But to add on to that point, I feel like it can be induced for both positive and negative agendas. And if I hear men's voices talking about me while I am in this disempowered, paralyzed state, then I think that maybe they might even be able to use a type of technology. Okay, I know I sound like I've got my tinfoil hat on tonight, but who knows? Maybe the fucking tinfoil hat will protect you from having sleep paralysis. But if I always hear this electricity sound or this buzzing sound, my body feels like it's buzzing, and I hear human men's voices in my room, that to me sounds like some sort of experiment that I've been induced into, whether my body's being altered or studied or moved around. We can get really, really deep into weird, nonlinear time and things like that, where, when you're in the dream state, time is differently, and maybe, you're asleep for a lot longer than it seems like, or maybe you're asleep for a lot shorter than it seems like, but a lot could be happening to you, through you, during these states, and I do believe that they can be induced. Like the village, everybody going through it all at once, that to me seems deliberate. Okay, not to sound too conspiratorial, but it sounds organized. And in which case, that gets back to, if you have a very negative, low vibrational type of lifestyle because of the things that you're involved in or the lifestyle that you lead, and you're somebody who has night terrors and sleep paralysis more often than, say, maybe a friend that you know or a family member who doesn't experience it, and their life is maybe less stressful, then that also promotes the idea that it really could be like agenda based. It could almost be something that can be induced upon you or to you or through you if you are susceptible to it. Does that make sense?
No, it does. It absolutely makes sense. I think there's definitely some different... I don't believe that it's just one way and nothing else. I believe that there's different people experiencing these phenomena for different reasons. Some might simply be something psychologically wrong with the person, and it's just because of a balance defect that they are experiencing visuals, they are experiencing the sleep paralysis. I think that there's a very good chance that, as you said, some of it could be induced, but from other sources or from oneself. I think there's a big placebo effect that happens a lot of times. Like you said with the town, it could be that everyone in the town starts talking, oh, Joe seen this, this, and this, and he had this happen to them. And the next thing you know, Susan down the street has it happen.
Right.
Well, then the town's buzzing, and then everyone's talking about it, and then this person hasn't. I think a lot of it could be, someone's misinterpretation of a dream. I think that happens a lot. I think someone just has an actual dream and they try to make it more than what it is. So they say, oh, I had a dream last night. It had to have been sleep paralysis. It was so real. There's a thin line that you have to tread on. Which side of the fence is it on? But I think it is a very real phenomenon. I think that, like you said, some of it is very, spiritual. Some of it's very kind, and it might be visitation coming to see us and share messages with us, and it's nothing to harm us. And then others, I believe that others are very malevolent. There's a lot of, I looked into it, and there was a lot of reports of some type of demonic thing that was very similar to one another. And it was known for crawling on top of people while they slept. And there were so many stories of the same exact being.
It's common.
It's so strange to me. How is it possible that so many people were seeing the same exact thing unless it's really there? And as you said, maybe it's a different dimension. Maybe it's a different linear time. It's hard to say. I always wonder the fact that, same thing with ghosts or spirits, that you see a ghost or spirit, you think it's a fragment of another life here, and you're seeing it, and we're the physical being, we're the ultimate thing, and that they are just this other thing. Well, how do we know that we are not the other thing? And we're actually in their world, and they're the actual ones living a full-blown life, and we're the ghosts, and they're seeing fragments of us. I've thought about that often as well, especially in like a dream state where maybe we're connecting, as you said, halfway between both worlds, and we're a little bit more in tune with one another, and now we're seeing fragments of their world, they're seeing fragments of ours, and it's almost like they're colliding more than they do on a normal visual spectrum.
Well said. Well said, my sir. Well said. I like it.
That's something I've contemplated on for quite a while.
No, I roll with that, man. That's a good perspective. Here towards the end of this episode, what I would like to do is I want to leave everybody with something to think about and ponder about the concept of sleep paralysis, because it's important to me that we always empower people who might feel disempowered in these types of paranormal situations. So why don't we talk a little bit more about the night terrors, okay? Can you give us maybe like a description of what a night terror is, and maybe talk a little bit about any of the stories that people have shared as well?
Night terrors, I think there's, like I said, such a thin line between the two, but there's also very different defining lines. And night terrors, I tend to think, can be caused for a lot of different reasons as well. I once worked with a kid that actually had got bitten by a mosquito as a child and actually contracted West Nile virus. And he was the first confirmed case, I think, in Pennsylvania, and he became very ill. And then he got over his sickness. But then after that, for some reason, started having night terrors. Now, the biggest difference right off the bat between night terrors and sleep paralysis is sleep paralysis, as you would expect with its name. You cannot move. You are aware of your surroundings. You can see the clock on the wall. You can see the lamp across the room. You can see your partner sleeping next to you. You cannot move. You cannot talk. You are literally a shell sitting there. If any music fans out there, you're like the guy from Metallica's music video 1. You can't do anything. You were just a body and mind that no one can hear. But there's things happening to you. Night terrors are a little different than that, because a lot of times people can move, and they move, quite erratically, where you wake up into a world of hell. And that's what he would wake up, even though he was bitten by a mosquito, and that's what caused this to happen. He had night terrors of spiders. And he would oftentimes wake up absolutely covered in hundreds of spiders. They'd be on his walls, on his windows, on his ceiling fan, and he would just be engulfed in them, and he could feel them crawling up his skin. He could feel them biting him. That became his reality. I think a lot of times in night, or sleep paralysis rather, I think someone's kind of questioning, okay, am I awake right now? I feel like I'm awake, but I don't know. I can't move my body. I have to be sleeping. So it's the argument back and forth. I'm not awake right now. I am awake right now. I'm not awake. So it's kind of in between worlds, whereas I think night terrors are a little bit different in the sense that you don't realize, you think it is reality.
Right. They're a little bit more like a nightmare, right? They're almost like a really extreme nightmare.
It is. And what's strange about them is through research that has been done, where they did test, neurotransmitters and things in your brain, they were able to see that how your brain perceives a night terror and a nightmare are a lot different. Different things are triggered, your brain activity is different, and one of the most interesting facts I found is that night terrors do not happen in the REM sleep that you would expect. Oftentimes in REM sleep is when you have your nightmares. They are often had certain times of the night as well. They are often, I could be wrong on this, I'm just going off old research that I had looked into, but during the middle of the night, the later hours of the night, and that's your nightmare. Night terrors oftentimes are in the early hours of your sleep and the late hours of your sleep just before you get up. So oftentimes it's your 11, 12, 1 o'clock. It's your 5, 6, 7 o'clock, which I found interesting because I thought it would be backwards from that. And
Right.
like I said, you don't know. You wake up from a dead sleep to things in the room crawling up the walls, to things on you. You feel them. You don't understand that you're dreaming. You can't tell yourself it is. You are at that point living in this reality. So that would be the biggest for anyone listening out there. The differences between the two is, one, you're questioning, am I or aren't I awake? I can't move, but I can see things. And it's a little bit of a different effect and feel to it, whereas night's terrors are just, oh my God, what reality did I wake up into? Would you agree with that, or would you disagree?
No, I completely agree. And getting back to that werewolf entity, when I would have a night terror, different from a nightmare, different from sleep paralysis, I always sort of experienced this werewolf guy, and he would manifest, always looking the same appearance. And I know it's very cliche, but in my night terrors, another common occurrence I would experience is running. And I always felt like I was running from something that I could hear coming behind me, like a freight train just barreling down the hallway at me, like a giant creature or a monster or something. I would always hear something. It'd be very loud and visceral. And when I have my night terrors, I always feel like, I weigh 1,000 pounds and I can't move and I can't run and everything is happening so slowly. I know it's cliche, but I think that everything that you've seen in the movies is always based on the truth. It's always based on things that people have experienced and described, and they come from reality. That's the most terrifying thing about horror films, is in some way, shape, or form, it exists in creation. Otherwise, we couldn't conceive of it. We couldn't dream it up and write it on paper or type it out. And so, like, I've had those dreams where I'm running in slow motion and there's something chasing me, and I always try to turn and look at it, and it's just too dark to see, but I can hear it. And then every once in a while, when I can get a glimpse at whatever's coming at me, it's this werewolf. It's like a giant wolf beast. He's probably 8 feet tall and just like this hulking creature coming at me. And every once in a while, when I was younger, not the last few years, but when I was younger, he'd catch me. And I didn't get away, and I could feel his claws sink into my back and just slam me to the ground. And all of this is happening in like super slow motion, and everything is very loud. And then I would wake myself out of it. So that's another thing that was always associated to my night terrors, was that I would wake up suddenly drenched in sweat. I know it's cliche, but this is where the movie ideas come from, is these things really happen to people.
No, I agree 100% with that. And I mean, one of the reasons I do agree with that, on many different levels, but one of the things that sounds very cliche as well, but it's certainly not, is you watch a lot of evil, satanic, devil-type movies where, and I'm not saying people are out there watching Satan movies, but I'm saying that you're out there watching some type of Hollywood movie about, The Exorcist, or the so-and-so's the devil woman, any type of thing like that. And a lot of times they show a lot of references that are, you look at them and you're like, okay, Hollywood's always shown me that. There's reasons that they show you that. And the reason I say that is, if you listen to our very first episode, one of the things that I've always been in tune with or connected with was the paranormal realm of ghosts and demons. Demons being one of the things that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, that I have always personally had a connection with. And one of the things that I came into contact with was that cliche, black-eyed, looks evil person that's possessed, and I have gotten to witness that. And it sounds like something out of a movie, but why do you think it's in a movie? Why do you think a lot of the things you see are in there? Because they are stemmed and based off of some sort of truth. They might have been stretched, they might have been pulled, but originally their roots are all the same. So I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, man, for sure.
You actually said something that one of our listeners had emailed me. Let me pull up this email. I get some emails from different people around the world telling us about our show. They like it. That's what's cool about the show, folks, is We love being able to bring you something different. We've only a few episodes in, and we're already getting emails pouring in. And one of them was about something that you had said, Daniel. So this is the second email from someone out there commenting on something you had said that struck them. Let me pull it up here.
And for all those listening, thank you very much. I'm glad that you resonate with what I had to share. And I'm only here to share, myself with you so that we can all connect and sort of figure this out.
Absolutely. And one of the things you said really resonated with this woman. She said, and this actually brings me to a topic I want to bring up, because this is another common night terror that you might not hear as much about, or even sleep paralysis. This kind of stems on both. That's why I said that there's a fine line between the two of them, because sometimes they're interchangeable. You can have night terrors while you're in sleep paralysis, but a lot of times you don't necessarily have to be in sleep paralysis to have night terror. So
okay, yeah,
it kind of flip-flops. But she said, most recently I had a terrifying experience. I woke up and my husband was cuddling with me, and one thing started to lead to another. His hand was down my thigh and rubbing my leg gently, but then he became very aggressive, and it was hurting me. I said, ouch, but it did not stop. I reached down to grab his hand away, and instead of grabbing a hand or something with... I reached down to grab his hand away, and instead grabbed a hand or something with very long, bony fingers and long fingernails. I tried to scream, but couldn't. I couldn't move. It kept holding my hand. It seemed to last for around 10 minutes or so, but suddenly I was being shaken awake by my husband. He said I was moaning deeply in my sleep, and he was scared that I was hurt. I was so confused, thinking that I had already been awake. Now, that's a very interesting thing. She mentioned this to me during an email, or sent that to me because you apparently had said something in the first episode about seeing the man with the long bony fingers reaching around the curtain in your house. And she explained that what she felt was to a T what you described there. And the interesting thing about this is, and no one would know this but me, about 2 months ago, I got an email from a completely different woman from a different area of the world. And she was telling me about some very profound evidence that she had. She sent me audio clips that are just mind-blowing of EVPs. You clearly hear people talking in the back of her home. Mm-hmm. Well, she had, through telling me several stories, told me about an incident that was very strange to her, where she had woke up in kind of a sleep paralysis type state, where she was laying there and she could feel what she described was her partner kind of, rubbing his hands on her and beginning a foreplay, and all of a sudden it was very aggressive. Mm-hmm. And she tried to stop him, and she couldn't, and she could not move, and she was frozen, almost like this thing had control of her and was having fun. Well, then finally she was able to snap out and rolled over, and when she whipped over and rolled over, there was no one in the room.
Yeah.
Now, what was very strange about it is her partner had died years earlier. When she woke up, she felt that it was, okay, for some reason she wasn't thinking in her mind, my partner has already passed, no one's here. She instantly just woke up, and in that state was like, okay, it's him. Well, then didn't put two and two together, whipped over, and there was no one there. All of a sudden she snapped to reality. Oh my God, well, of course that's not him. He's not here. He had passed away. And then she started experiencing after that these EVPs, and these EVPs are magnificent. And it's very just crazy to me, because this woman who reached out to me, completely separate, had said about something similar. So I started looking into it a little bit, and one of the very common things in women is, and I said that they actually call it the incubus stage. There's the intruder stage, the incubus stage, and the levitation stage of night terrors. Well, the incubus stage doesn't necessarily mean the classic definition of incubus. It just means that the thing's attacking you. It's pulling on you. It's tugging on you. It's physically trying to cause harm. But on the other side of that, there is the traditional sense of incubus, where many, many women across the planet have talked about waking up in a frozen state, unable to move, and being sexually harassed by some type of demonic spirit who has control of them. And I thought it was very interesting that two different people that had nothing to do with the show emailed me to tell me separate stories, but in their description of the things they've experienced, both mentioned something very similar, and through my research found just hundreds of cases online about this.
That's fascinating to me. I mean, what you're hearing right now, listeners, is consistent and congruent testimonials by people all over the world who are experiencing similar or exact phenomenon in their lives, and in this particular case, to me, it sounds like there are beings from other dimensions and other densities and frequencies and vibrations that might be more attracted to abusing sexual energy. Maybe even women who have some sort of trauma in that way. And I think that sharing these stories and spreading an awareness about it's a very powerful thing that we're talking about here.
I agree 100%. I mean, and that's why we made this show, folks, is like I said, this is a place for you to hear entertaining, stories, obviously, and hear what we have to say, but it's also a place for people to connect things that they've experienced in their life with things that other people have experienced, whether the same or whether ultimately different. Something that you can connect and say, okay, wow, I'm not crazy, because let's face it, I think the study is that 75% of the population of the world believes that there's something else out there beyond just us as far as a supernatural sense. I read a statistic on that. Not necessarily saying it's ghosts or Bigfoot or things like that. It's 75% of the entire world's population believe there's something beyond just us.
Correct.
Now,
and even the way frequency works, even 1% is enough. 1% beyond 50% is enough to tip the scale. So 75% is significant.
That's huge. And I mean, and I think, I forget what the statistic was there, but 75% believe there's something else out there. And then out of that 75%, I think it was like 45 or 50% of that have actually experienced something in their life that they can just absolutely not explain with logic, that is something beyond the bounds of normal reality. So it's very interesting. Like I said, we wanted to create something where people can kind of connect and network within that realm and share their stories. So me and Dan love to dive into different subject matter and kind of bring these entertaining topics to you and talk about different things that people might have experienced. And then in the meantime, and in between, certainly have a show where people can call in and tell us of those experiences. But as Daniel said, it is just staggering the congruent evidence out there that just people were experiencing the same things in different places of the world, different backgrounds, different religions, all experiencing the same, feelings, the same sense, the same sightings. And, as we can tell you and attest to firsthand, we are now getting an outpour of emails and, listeners messaging into us that are explaining things that don't know one another, that are almost identical. And it's just very interesting. In fact, one of the stories I recorded 2 days ago that's airing tomorrow night was about another incident of waking up in the middle of the night and the old hag lady was sitting and across the room staring at her. And this old woman pops up time and time again, not only in sleep paralysis and night terrors, but a lot of times they're just often nighttime entity sightings. And that was one of the other little branch offs of tonight's shows. Those are the two main topics we want to talk about. And kind of associated with that is just other sightings of things at nighttime. But one of those things I wanted to mention was this old woman. She's been seen time and time again. She's vividly seen wearing usually a lot of different clothing at one time. It seems, what I read, one account said that it seemed like she was wearing all of her belongings on her at one time. Like she didn't have a lot. She was kind of a haggard woman, and she, oftentimes from what I've been described or seen people describe, is I guess you could say a malevolent being. Sometimes she just seems indifferent, but a lot of times she's very hateful towards the people that see her. Like she has a lot of anger built up for some reason or another. So that's another interesting thing. Like I mentioned earlier, I kind of wanted to get back to is the sighting of that specific thing. But if you have seen something out there, please leave a comment, leave us a message, send us an email, and tell us about your experiences out there. So we would love to, maybe read them on the show, maybe bring you on one of our shows. And you can message us at brutalbusinessent@gmail.com. And again, that is brutalbusinessent@gmail.com. Let us know what you want to hear on the show. Let us know your experiences and tell us about things that you've seen.
It's funny when you describe her. Two things on that woman is that when you described her the way that you did, the first thing that I thought of was the labyrinth in the junkyard when Sarah encounters that old woman with all of her stuff.
Yes.
That's what I pictured. And another thing that's funny is how many accounts you say people report about that entity. But if you look at my track record in sleep paralysis, where I've been having it for 23 years, okay, and I've never encountered her.
And that's very interesting. I was actually going to bring that up to you earlier because you've told me a lot of different things that you've experienced, and I haven't heard you mention her. And you didn't mention her earlier in the different sightings that a lot of people see. So that is interesting as well. As there's a lot of people who see thousands of stories who see the man in the hat, and then maybe never see the woman. Maybe they see both of them. Some people only see the woman and don't see the man in the hat. Some people see neither and see something different than that. But there's always similarities connecting them together either way. It's very, very strange to me.
So if you listen to my intro of the topic and we talk about these entities and the ones that I've experienced and the ones other people have reported, then tying back into my theory that sometimes I think that it can be agenda-based or it might even be induced for specific reasons, then it also makes you wonder why certain people only see certain entities but not others, and what those particular beings mean to that person, like the man in the hat or the werewolf or the little creature who walks around or the giant crab on the ceiling or like the robed beings who sometimes just fucking line up around your bed, and so one person may never see the robed beings, but they might see the old lady. I wonder what that particular being means to that person, or what that circumstance means, or what's happening in their life that attracts that entity. It's all very fascinating to ponder on.
It really is, because I also think, like you said, what makes that person see those specific ones or just that specific one, and then taking it a level deeper than that, if you take 1,000 different stories of people that's seen the old haggard woman, what do they have in common?
Right.
What is making those 1,000 people see the woman, another 1,000 people see the man, and another 1,000 people see another one we hear often of a small young boy?
Let me place a call to action. Let me place a call to action here for our listeners. I encourage everybody listening to please continue emailing in and sharing your stories. And you're always anonymous. Your names are never shared. However, your stories are. And one thing that Garrett and I have discussed in the past is having an interest and a passion in trying to connect the dots. Okay, finding all the commonalities in these stories we collect and seeing if we can build a bigger picture out of them. So, like Garrett posed the question, what do these 1,000 people have in common that only see the haggard woman, and what do those 1,000 people have in common who only see the man in the hat? Okay, so you could say, okay, well, there is a certain demographic, a certain type, maybe a certain age group, or a certain type of trauma that you're going through that makes you more prone to experiencing that particular being in the sleep paralysis state. So maybe if you could send in something significant about yourself that resonates with you, that maybe you were going through at the time that you had this night terror, that you had this sleep paralysis. Let's see if we can sort of build some sort of key system, okay, that connects the dots and links up what tends to attract that particular being in this sleep paralysis state. Here, I'll go first. I'm going to go on record and I'll make the first entry. When I hear the electric buzzing sound, okay, and I hear human voices in my space, in my room, I tend to be going through some sort of medical challenge, okay, in my life that's pretty profound, pretty daily drama that I'm dealing with. When I experience the robed beings, okay, the ones who don't have a face or any hands, but they're these tall, 7-8 foot beings standing over my bed, I tend to be having relationship or romantic problems in my life. When I have a sleep terror, it usually has to do with where I'm living. The circumstances of my house and the people who live in it are when I tend to have sleep terrors or night terrors. So that'll get us started. That'll give you an example of to sit down and meditate on it. What am I going through in my life when I had this night terror? What was I experiencing, over the past couple weeks or couple days that led up to a sleep paralysis event? And if you can send in those stories, because we can make a list and we can categorize things, maybe we can start building a narrative here that down the line, weeks, months, or years down the line, we're going to be able to not only track when these things happen, but but how and why, and then we can determine, whether or not we can control them or how we can avoid them and look for more empowering ways to sort of, experience this. One thing that I also want to just keep riffing on here, Garrett, is I want to always leave people in an empowered state. Okay. Now, for me, as an entertainer, somebody who works in the film industry as an actor and a filmmaker, I love to entertain. But over the past couple years, it's been my highest excitement to empower people and promote conscious media that people can use as tools to better improve their life with. Here is how I would like to close this topic of sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis was happening to me so many times, so often, okay, that I stopped getting scared of it. I stopped getting frightened. I stopped feeling directly disempowered, and I started to sort of acknowledge the fact that in some way, shape, or form, we're all creating our reality. We're all creating the experiences that we have, whether they're subconsciously or consciously. And when you remind yourself of that thought, when the sleep paralysis kicks in, you wake up in this lucid state, you don't have control of your body, and you may be experiencing a malevolent entity. You might have extraterrestrials doing some sort of work on you. You might hear sounds but not see things. You might be having an uncomfortable experience with a particular entity. Here's what I was doing. At first, immediately acknowledge the fact that you are having sleep paralysis, okay? And literally do this. Tell yourself that you are awake. Okay, my name is Daniel, and I'm having sleep paralysis right now. I hear this loud buzzing sound, and I think I see a being in the corner of my room, but I'm having sleep paralysis. And I can't move my body, but I have an awareness of what's happening. Right then and there, that's your first step to taking control over the situation that you're in. Instead of just feeling like you're in the passenger seat and somebody else is driving the wheel, what you're doing here is you're starting to take that wheel back. You're getting into the driver's seat of the situation and taking control over it so that you don't feel as disempowered. And then you can start letting go of the fear that we all go through when we have this experience. So the first thing you do is acknowledge, I'm having sleep paralysis. That gives you an awareness, and you're acknowledging the fact that it's happening, okay? Because that's the most disempowering fear-based thing that we all go through in sleep paralysis state, is that we feel like we are subject to this thing happening and we're not in control, and it's very scary and we don't know what's going to happen next, okay? But one thing you do have control over is just stating it like an affirmation, I'm having sleep paralysis. Sure, maybe you can't move your body yet, but you can say that to yourself. You can think that to yourself and come into that power, because that's the first step in this process of getting control over your body and waking up, ultimately, if that's what you want to do. So I agree.
I agree 100% with that. I mean, I think that because as you said, if you are giving negative energy, if you're going around in a bad state of mind and bad state of life, you're empowering things that be, whether in your mind or whether it is something of another dimension, you're giving that power to act on those negative things and empowering it.
Correct.
But when you take a step back and say, no, I understand that I am awake right now, I just cannot move, I'm hearing something, I'm seeing something in the room, but I understand that
Correct.
I am awake right now, then you're giving yourself power, and you take the power back from that being, from that mind frame, from that energy. And that's what, like you said, ultimately gives you the first step in power back to getting back to who you are, getting back to your full control.
Absolutely. So check this out. I'm going to teach you guys the power of paradox and how you can use it in this moment. What happens when you wake up in sleep paralysis? You feel disempowered. You have fear, your anxiety, you don't know what's happening. And then if you're seeing these creatures that you have no knowledge or scientific awareness of what they are, what their agenda is, you get scared. That's natural. That's okay. Okay? But if you want your power back, well, there's an affirmation in the law of attraction that I like to teach people. Persistence is resistance. So you wake up in sleep paralysis and you try to move your body, wiggle your toes, wiggle your arms. You know, sometimes like I'll be laying in bed next to my partner and I'll try to like see if I can get her to wake me up. I'll see if I can shake her or physically move her so that she will wake me out of this state. but you can't move. You're paralyzed, right? So as you're trying and trying and trying to get yourself to wake up, you can't seem to shake out of it. You can't jar yourself out of this paralyzed state. And the harder you try, the more you really feel sort of like that anchor, that heaviness of being paralyzed. So when you state to yourself, I am having sleep paralysis, but I am aware of what's happening. I'm present in this moment. Paradoxically, if you actually sit with it, now I know this sounds crazy. I know I'm talking crazy talk here, but if you sit with it for a moment, I know time moves very slowly in this state of being, but we're always trying to wake up as fast as we can. See what happens when you sit with it for a minute and don't try to snap out of it. Don't try to wiggle yourself or shake yourself out of it, because the harder you try, the harder it is to actually wake up. That's the paradox. The paradox is if you actually sit with the sleep paralysis and you lean into it and see what maybe it's trying to teach you something. We don't know. Maybe it has a message to deliver. And the only reason why sleep paralysis keeps reoccurring in our lives, like a type of law of attraction type of thing, is because we're not acknowledging what the message is that's hidden in the darkness. Who knows, Garrett? Maybe the werewolves and the haggard ladies and the crab-robed hat man, maybe all of it is a message from Spirit trying to teach us something, trying to shake us awake in our waking life in
Very
this
well
state
could.
of being. We don't
No,
know,
that
man.
makes
What I'm
sense.
trying to do is offer new ways to look at things that are fear-based and very disempowering. So sit with the sleep paralysis for a minute. And the reason why I'm telling you to do this is because ultimately at the end of the day, it is very scary. Okay, and I can admit that, and I can accept that. But I'm telling you guys right now, once I decided to stay in the sleep paralysis and try to hear what those men were saying, or watch what the aliens were doing, or see what the hat man in the doorway, has to show me, I fucking wake up every time. Trying to shake myself awake never snaps me out of it. But if I stay there, that seems to be the trigger that snaps me right out of it, and boom, I'm awake. So sit with it for a minute and see what it has to teach you. Maybe one of those beings who is scary or frightening or malevolent or threatening, maybe that's their reflection back to you because of how scared you are in the moment. In that non-physical state, things manifest very quickly there. But if you just sit there and you look at that being, as hard as it is for you and as frightening as it might be, see what they have to teach you. Maybe they have a message to deliver, or something to say, or something to show you in symbolism. We don't know. Okay, we're all learning here together. But these are new ways to look at something that's disempowering. Okay, sit with it for a minute, and you will wake up. You will snap out of it by just staying present and acknowledging whatever this moment has to teach you. The end.
No, absolutely. I agree 100% with that because, as you had said, the farther you are from the problem or the fear, the farther you are from a solution to that
Correct.
fear. So
Correct.
you're running away from what's causing the fear and the problem, but you're also running away from the solution, whereas if you man up and go against that, you come face to face with your fear, you face the terrorizer, so to speak. You might learn something from it, as Daniel had said, or you might wake up because that is some type of internal test to yourself. And are you going to be the one that faces it, or are you going to be the one that runs away? And you have to decide that yourself. And maybe if you face it, then you defeat it and you won't have these things anymore, or there won't be a severe. But if you keep running away, there's a chance it'll just keep revisiting. So leaves you some things to think about. We hope you enjoyed, our discussion tonight on the two different topics. And if you did, please, like I said, drop us a line on our comment section on the show. Share us around, give us a like and a follow. And you can keep in tune with this and all of our other radio shows at Spreaker.com or Spreaker, podcast app. But you can also check us out on www.teambrutalbusiness.com. That's teambrutalbusiness.com. We have a radio show tab on there for all of our radio shows, all other upcoming news. We do have a show airing tomorrow night. That is Celestial Oddities Odd World Listeners Encounters Volume 2. And we got some great stories on there. Everything from a killer ghost, meaning a ghost of a killer that has terrorized a home, to a little bit of sleep paralysis like we talked about tonight, and to a story that I told that I think you guys would be interested in about a ghost village that I stumbled upon a while back. And I know that sounds very far-fetched, but if you listen to it, it's a very interesting story. It's something I actually had shelved in my brain for quite a while. And once we started getting back into the paranormal world again, I took several years away from my investigations and things. Recently, in the last 2 years, got back into it. All of a sudden, I had a very vivid dream about an old memory that I had forgotten long about that resurfaced. So make sure you check out that show tomorrow. That'll be 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And check all of our past episodes and future episodes on all of the online major distribution channels out there and at teambrutalbusiness.com. Our next episode with Daniel and I together will be next month in October, or it could be in a week. We're working out trying to get you guys back another episode here in the next couple weeks. We got to see our availability. We both stay pretty busy, but either way, whether in a couple weeks or next month, we are bringing you a episode about none other than Yeti, about Sasquatch, Bigfoot, the Abominable Snowman. We're going to bring all of the cards to the table and talk about the different sightings, our theories on the subject matter that I know a lot of people touched on. We don't want to be cliche because we know it's one of the biggest topics out there in the paranormal world, but we certainly want to give our takes on it because we do something a little different. Is it a ghost? Is it a cryptid? Is it an alien visitation of some sort? We're going to let you know what our thoughts are here. Dan, do you want to have any other last moment closing thoughts or statements you'd like to make for tonight?
Yeah, brother, thank you very much. I just want to thank all of the listeners that interact directly with Garrett in the second half of our show that runs every month. We do appreciate all the calls and the emails. Interacting with you guys and building a community, I think is really important and something that Garrett and I are both excited about. So I would like to thank all the listeners who resonate with the things that I have to offer and the things that Garrett, really takes his time to investigate and research for us. And we just genuinely enjoy doing the show, and we thank all of the listeners. And like Garrett said, on the next episode is going to be about the Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeti, Abominable Snowman. I'm very excited to talk to you guys about that because I do have personal experiences to share. We're going to dive into that topic. And that's it, guys. I thank you very much for listening.
Absolutely, folks. Well, we'll catch you here again in a few weeks on me and Dan's show together, talking about those subjects. And if you want to hit us, like I said, brutalbusinessent@gmail.com. Send us an email. Let us know what you want to see, what you don't want to see, what questions you have, and also your stories. And make sure you check our show out tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we listen to listeners' experiences on Oddworld Celestial Oddities. We'll catch you next time. Everybody have a good night.